1892, the sleepy city of Fall River, Massachusetts was shattered by a gruesome murder. The bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden, who had been murdered with an axe, were discovered in their home. While investigators were initially stumped, they eventually zeroed in on Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden, a spinster and Sunday school teacher from a privileged background, was widely regarded as the last person on earth capable of committing such a heinous crime. But the police had a hard time finding new leads in the murder investigation, and they couldn't ignore the fact that Liz's story kept shifting. The young woman ultimately never admitted to the murders. However, the entire country was riveted by her trial in 1893. It only added to the mystery that she was exonerated in the end. Did Lizzie Borden really murder her dad and mom? For what reason, if that's the case? If not her, then who else did it? There was nothing out of the ordinary about the beginning of August 4, 1892, at the Borden home in Fall River, Massachusetts. While Lizzie slept on the second floor, the family's maid Bridget Sullivan prepared breakfast for Andrew and Abby Borden. Andrew quickly left for the city. Additionally, Abby decided to clean up the guest room where Liz's uncle had slept the night before. When it came to wealth and status in Fall River, the Bordens were unrivaled. After his first wife Sarah passed away, Andrew wed his second wife a few years later. Emma and Lizzie, two of his daughters, had a stellar reputation for good behavior and Christian piety. Although things appeared normal on the surface, there was trouble in the Borden household. In spite of the fact that Abby had been their stepmother for practically their entire lives, Emma and Lizzie disliked her. And Lizzie had hoped desperately that they could relocate to a more pleasant neighborhood. August of that year was a particularly trying time for the Borden family. The weather, for one thing, was stiflingly hot. And for the past few days, the Borden family had been feeling under the weather, possibly due to some spoiled mutton stew. Except for Sullivan, though, everyone was back to normal by morning of the 4th of August. Abby went up to the guest room after Andrew Borden had left for town and had made the bed and straightened up. And, in the stifling early August heat, someone had followed her. Andrew Borden came back from town a while later. When he asked Lizzie where Abby was, she told him that Mrs. Borden had left the house. Lizzie claims that her stepmother got word of a sick friend in a note. The story convinced Andrew. He made himself comfortable on a couch in the living room while Sullivan, still ill, retired to her bedroom for a nap. But a short while later, the maid was jolted awake by a scream. To Sullivan's horror, it was Lizzie Borden sobbing the news that her father had died. A short time after Andrew Borden's body was found, Sullivan left the house in search of medical help. However, by that time, Liz's yelling had already drawn the attention of several nearby residents, who promptly called the police. Slowly but surely, a curious mob gathered outside the Borden home. As of this time, Abby's whereabouts was still a mystery. She told them that her stepmother had received a note asking her to visit a sick friend, the same story she had told her father. Lizzie also revealed that both of her parents had been sick in the days prior, and that she had concluded that the milk they had given her had been tainted. The maid checked on Abby's whereabouts upstairs after Sullivan returned with a local physician named Seabury Bowen and discovered her body lying face down. A pool of her own blood surrounded her. After further investigation, it was found that Abby Borden had been hit 19 times with a hatchet. In addition, Andrew had been struck 11 times by the same weapon. Andrew took less damage, but his body was still quite gory. Andrew's nose had been hacked off at the bridge and one of his eyes had been gouged out. Abby's blood, meanwhile, had turned a dark color and had begun to clot. Bowen concluded that she had been the first victim because of this. The question is, who had murdered them? More questions than answers would be raised by the Borden murders, unfortunately. Initially, the police had no reason to suspect Lizzie Borden. After all, she came from a prestigious family and was a respected spinster and Sunday school teacher. More importantly, Lizzie testified under oath to District Attorney Hosea Knowlton that she was in the barn at the time of the attacks looking for a piece of iron. When police first learned of the killings, they assumed a male suspect, possibly a foreigner, was responsible. A few hours later, they arbitrarily detained a harmless Portuguese refugee. Unfortunately, that was just one false assumption. On a neighboring farm, a blooded hatchet was discovered, but it had been used to slaughter chickens. There was a strange man spotted on the Bordens' property around the time of the murders, but he had a solid alibi. While this was going on, Lizzie Borden's version of events was shifting. Her story about going in search of iron quickly shifted to one about scavenging for pears in the barn's attic. Not even a piece of clothing stained with blood could be used as evidence against her. But as they dug deeper into the double murder, the police concluded that nobody else was a likely suspect. If Abby were murdered in the morning, the killer, who wasn't Lizzie or Sullivan, would have had to hide for hours until Andrew got home from town if she was killed that early in the day. At that time, there was a good chance that Lizzie or Sullivan would have seen them. Where did Lizzie's stepmother get the note she said she wrote? Given that Abby had obviously never left the house, the mystery deepened as to its whereabouts. It was possible that Lizzie's stepmother accidentally burned it, she told her friend Alice Russell. Additionally, detectives learned that the day before the murders, Lizzie had visited a pharmacy in an attempt to purchase prussic acid, a highly toxic chemical. She defended her need for it by saying that she was finishing off a sealskin cape. The store clerk had said she needed a prescription before she could buy it, so she had been unable to purchase it. Russell also witnessed Lizzie destroying one of her dresses by setting fire to it at her stove a few days after the murders. Lizzie said the dress was too stained to wear again when Russell asked why she was doing it. In an inquest hearing held on August 8, Borden gave conflicting testimony about the murders, which led to the M. In 1893, the trial of Lizzie Borden began, and the country quickly became engrossed in the contentious case. Lizzie Borden defense opens blared the newspaper headlines. Day after day, reporters from Boston and New York descended upon the courthouse to cover what they dubbed the Great Trial, the Borden murder trial. Deborah Allard, a reporter and resident of Fall River, remarked, "Our proper Victorian ancestors couldn't fathom that someone in the upper class, especially a woman, could commit such a heinous crime." Despite the fact that Lizzie never gave testimony at the trial, she was the center of attention. A sheet of tissue paper that had been covering her father's head fell to the floor at one point. It was the sight of the battered skull that caused Lizzie to pass out. However, Lizzie's strategy of presenting the Borden's skulls paid off. Since Lizzie wasn't covered in blood, her attorney concluded that the real culprit must have been. This has prompted the theory that she was unclothed while committing the murders. Even as the trial progressed, the defense was able to throw more mud into the works. They presented testimony from people who claimed to have seen Lizzie leave the barn around the time of the murders, as well as people who claimed to have seen suspicious people on the Borden property. Even the drugstore clerk's testimony was expunged from the record after the defense argued that it was irrelevant and prejudicial. They claimed the pharmacist had made a mistake in identifying Lizzie Borden. Besides, prussic acid could still be used for good even if Lizzie was the woman in the shop. In a trial for the murders of Andrew and Abby, Lizzie was found not guilty on June 19, 1893. Once things calmed down, Lizzie and her sister Emma, who had inherited their father's estate, bought a home in the part of Fall River that Lizzie had always wanted to be in. When Lizzie, now known as Lizbeth, Borden met Nance O'Neill, an actress, in 1904, their harmonious existence in Fall River came to an end. A close relationship developed between them, leading some to speculate that they were lovers, despite Emma's disapproval. As soon as Lizzie started dating Nance, Emma started looking for a new place to live, and she and Lizzie were roommates for only 2 years. For the rest of her life, Lizzie Borden remained largely unseen and unheard. She was 67 years old when she passed away in 1927, taking her knowledge of the murders with her. People still argue, nearly a century after her death, about whether or not she actually murdered her father and stepmother. Yet, if Lizzie Borden wasn't responsible for the murders, then who was? There is speculation that William, Andrew's illegitimate son, committed the murder and that Lizzie and Emma worked together to cover it up. Some people think the two sisters worked together to plan the killings. Yet another theory proposes that an affair between Lizzie and Sullivan was the impetus for the murders. Others Others, however, are left wondering whether an outsider was responsible. The journals of Lizzie's attorney, Andrew Jackson Jennings, were acquired by the Fall River Historical Society in 2012. Jennings' direct observations of his client, who history remembers as cold and callous, were revealed in his journals. However, Jennings recognized Lizzie's vulnerability as a grieving woman. However, these diaries did little to shed light on who was responsible for the murders of the Borden family. Thus, the enigma remains. In the same vein, the well-known rhyme about the Borden murders goes like this: Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.